So here's a question as we're coming on the air. If somebody is still alive inside a building, should you tear it down? Because that literally almost happened in Davenport, Iowa, with officials at almost the last minute calling off plans to demolish a partially collapsed apartment. Now, huge questions about accountability. Our team asking those tough questions on the ground and what they're hearing from family members who still cannot find their loved ones. Also tonight, the sales pitch and the test ahead for President Biden and Speaker McCarthy on their deal to stop a potential global economic meltdown. Do they have the votes? We're not quite sure, but we're going to take you inside the key meeting happening about 2 blocks from where I'm standing right now. Plus, in tonight's original, why a U.S. aid group may pull money out of Uganda after the country passed a new law sentencing gay people to death. Here at home, why the star pitcher for the L.A. Dodgers is slamming his own team for giving an award to a pro-LGBTQ plus group that he says insults Christians. And the new comments from an American tennis star, why she says the racist abuse she's faced has only gotten worse, what the French Open is trying to do to help. That's later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we're starting in Davenport, Iowa, where in just a second, you're going to see the new drone video of that partially collapsed apartment building. The city's mayor saying in just the last couple of hours that 5 people are still unaccounted for, and 2 of those people may be inside this building. And listen, this is a community that is angry right now. They are furious. Why? You see some of the protests here because of a plan that would have torn down that building, even though late last night a 52-year-old woman was found alive inside, even after the city had called off the search mission. The family of Lisa Brooks, who they say is disabled, apparently hid under pillows in her bathtub for more than a full day. So let us spell that out even more clearly. Even with the family of at least one person saying their loved one was still missing, the city had still planned to demolish the building. The city's fire marshal getting choked up, talking about how this whole process has played out.
You can't run up to a pile of bricks and rocks and just start throwing things off. As much as we want to get everybody out, and we want to do it right now.
So here's what we're learning tonight. Pretty much every official who's spoken to members of the media says this building is in imminent danger. I'm quoting, imminent danger of falling down. One of them was like, we could walk out of this news conference and it could already be on the ground. But how did this collapse itself happen? That is TBD. No cause just yet. And right now, the door is still open to a criminal investigation into the building's owner, per the city. Nothing's been set in stone just yet, but that is still on the table. Shaq Brewster is live for us in Davenport, Iowa. Help us understand this question, Shaq, because I think it's one that a lot of people have right now. We covered this story live on the air 24 hours ago, right? And at that point, the city was getting ready to tear this building down. Here we are 24 hours later. It's all of a sudden finding people like Lisa Brooks alive, potentially restarting their search. How did that happen?
Yeah, you know, the mayor started his press conference by addressing that obvious question. Why didn't search rescue teams, why weren't they able to find Lisa before today and before she essentially had herself discovered by calling her family member? And he said he did not know and said the city is committed to finding that answer. But we did hear from other officials explain a little bit of the rush to tear this building down. And you mentioned it there. They say it's at risk of collapsing essentially at any point, that it's structurally unsound. And the concern is if you send in more rescue folks, if you continue that search and rescue, then you're putting other people's lives at risk. I want you to listen to how the fire marshal explained this dynamic and this real balance that they have to face.
When we originally had evaluated the scene, we didn't have the indications, even from the state teams, from the canine dogs in there, that would make us proceed. The fire department pulled Lisa Brooks out of that apartment last night. That right there is an indicator that we need to go up there.
But I'll tell you, Hallie, the frustration among members in the community is that this is what they were warning about when they were protesting the idea of this building coming down. They were convinced. Lisa's nephew was convinced. He told me that she was still inside. He didn't want to lose any hope yet, and then she was rescued. So that is the frustration that you're dealing with. Right now, the demolition is on pause temporarily, but you'll continue to see. They say they're reassessing each and every day, and they're seeing as the dynamics change, but you really get a sense of that tension and that balance they have to deal with.
Talk to me about some of the other tension here, right? The tension in the community, because we've seen more of these protests today in Davenport. It feels like, and you would know this, there is real anger there. You talked with the teenage son of one man who's missing, right? Tell us more.
Yeah, real anger there, real questions over how this collapse even happened in the first place. And yeah, I want to let you hear a little bit of that conversation because he was supposed to be graduating this week. His graduation is on Friday. He was supposed to be taking finals today. His dad was supposed to be there at his graduation. Now he's left with all these questions. And then not only the questions and potential grief of dealing with his father, who is unaccounted for and who officials say is likely still in the building, but he's dealing with the idea that he can't get answers, specific answers to the many questions that he faces. Listen to a little bit of our conversation.
They said they had 2 rescue teams, I guess, but they're nowhere to be found. They're not out here. So I don't really know what's going on. It's been a new story every hour.
Is that frustrating?
Yeah. I just want to know where my dad's at. That's about it.
The concern from members of the family is that if their loved ones are inside this building and there's that demolition process, then they don't know if they can ever retrieve their loved one. The mayor and city officials have said if they go forward with the demolition, they will treat this process with dignity. But you see that tension on full display here in Davenport.
And still, I think a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty about where this process goes next. Shaq Brewster live for us in Davenport on this important story. Thank you, Shaq. Appreciate it. Let's bring it back now to another big story here in Washington and a new signal in literally the last 7 minutes that this deal to make sure that the United States government pays its bills on time will actually make it to the House floor. There had been this big test in a committee meeting happening as we speak. I think you're actually looking live at that, not to get in the weeds, Rules Committee meeting, and we've just gotten an indication that, in fact, this thing will move forward, that it will not end up blocked. Remember, this is all to avoid, essentially, a global economic meltdown, with the sales pitch happening as we speak. Both President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy trying to lock up support from lawmakers. Because remember, just because they've come to an agreement to make sure the U.S. doesn't default, they still got to get everybody to agree for it, or at least enough people to actually pass Congress here, right? But there is skepticism on both sides of the aisle. Some conservative hardliners floating the idea of even trying to topple the speaker himself over all of this, according to 2 sources familiar talking to NBC News. And then there is that derailment threat in the Rules Committee we just mentioned.
If you're out there watching this, every one of my colleagues, be very clear. Not one Republican should vote for this deal. It is a bad deal. That is why this group will oppose it. We will continue to fight it today, tomorrow, and no matter what happens, there's going to be a reckoning.
Now, some Republicans are going to vote for this deal, right? That is something that we do know. It looks like a full House vote will happen as early as tomorrow night. After that, the Senate goes. That's TBD on timing. All ahead of that, hopefully, key deadline, June 5th. That's when the U.S. runs out of money to pay the debts that it owes. Keep in mind that this is a deal, right? This is an agreement that would have real impacts on real people. It would tighten up federal money. It would increase work requirements for some older Americans on the SNAP food assistance program. And it would make people start paying their federal student loans again later this summer. I want to bring in Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill. So there was this big meeting, not to get weedsy about it, Ryan, but there was this big meeting of the Rules Committee, very procedural, very processy. We would not talk about it on the national news, except for in an instance like this, right, where it was sort of make or break for this agreement moving forward. It looks as though in the last couple of minutes we've heard from a key member on the Republican side who will, in fact, vote to move this forward. How is it looking? Give us the landscape for the next 24 hours here.
Yeah, and I'll try not to get too into the weeds in this, Hallie, but you're right. The Rules Committee is an important gatekeeper when it comes to all the legislation that makes it to the House of Representatives. It has to go through the Rules Committee. It's heavily weighted in favor of the majority. And one of the deals that Kevin McCarthy made when he became Speaker was to put 3 members of the Freedom Caucus on that Rules Committee for a moment just like this. That it would need to pass the muster of those 3 Freedom Caucus members for something to even get to the House floor. And there was some thought that perhaps it wouldn't get past that barrier. But it looks as though, as you're alluding to, Thomas Massie, who's one of those members from Kentucky, who's been somebody that's been very skeptical of these negotiations, but has had somewhat of an open mind to this deal when it finally came to fruition, has said that while he doesn't like the deal, he is going to give the full House of Representatives the opportunity to vote on that deal. So that was a very important step. Now, they haven't voted yet, but it looks as though they're heading in that direction. And now the real test for Kevin McCarthy is going to be that number of votes that he's got to get on the House floor. And, we've known from the beginning that this was going to have to be some sort of combination between Republicans and Democrats that gets it over the finish line. This is how McCarthy told our Hallie Vitale earlier about how he's working to get that vote number in the column that will get it over the finish line.
Have you had any conversations with members of the Freedom Caucus that have been against this bill and now are saying they might vote motion to vacate?
I've talked to many about whether they're for or against the bill. I'm not sure what in the bill people are concerned about. It is the largest savings of $2.1 trillion we've ever had.
And so that motion to vacate, that's the option that members have, just a couple of members to call up Kevin McCarthy's speakership and make him go through that whole process that he went through at the beginning of the year to hold on to his speakership. That's an option that members have at their disposal. They're not taking it off the table right now, Hallie, but it doesn't look as though this is ultimately going to come to that. But it is just something that's always in the background of these negotiations in the House of Representatives.
Okay, so to lay this out, I think, Ryan, it's fair to say, right, there's this agreement on the table. It looks as though with all the caveats you just laid out, it's going to potentially move forward. We'll know when this vote happens. Fine. On the left, you've got some progressives who say, hey, we don't like some of the work requirements in here for, like, the SNAP program. They're upset about that. On the far right, you've got conservative hardliners who say, we don't actually think that there were enough cuts on this. Now, apparently, based on our reporting, some of those conservative hardliners are floating the idea to perhaps maybe think about ousting Kevin McCarthy as Speaker altogether, because it only takes one of them now to bring that to the floor. We just heard Congressman Ken Buck kind of back away from that with our colleague Kristen Welker here. Where does that stand? Like, is McCarthy's job in jeopardy because of this, or is that kind of a sideshow?
I do think that that's something that's in the background. It's something people are always thinking about. But you're right, Hallie. Congressman Buck, other Freedom Caucus members that we talked to today, they're not taking it off the table, but it doesn't look like something that they're going to push, at least not at this stage. Now, come back to me in 24, 48 hours, and we'll see what the lay of the land is. But at this point, it's really just about getting this bill passed, and conservatives are still attempting to try and make tweaks to it right up until the last minute.
Well, we may be coming back to you well before then, Ryan, like in the next 30 minutes if this vote goes down. I will let you go gaggle with your colleagues who just walked behind you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Lots to watch on that front. Lots to watch, too, down in Florida tonight, where police have another suspect in custody connected to a shooting near a Florida beach on Memorial Day that left 9 people hurt. Police say as of this morning, they've recovered 5 guns from the suspects, 2 of which were stolen. They want help IDing 3 other people who they think were involved in this whole thing. The city's mayor saying not too long ago he is confident they'll find them. Watch.
When you do something like this in broad daylight with CCTV cameras up and down our Broadwalk, you will be identified and you will be caught and brought to justice.
What was supposed to be a relaxing day off turned violent when police say 2 groups of people got into a fight. You're looking at some video that seems to show the moment right after shots were fired. People running, right? People taking off, people trying to find shelter and safety. This shooting, just one instance of violence over the last few days. At least 16 people have been killed, dozens more hurt in shootings across the country this Memorial Day weekend. Guad Venegas has been covering this story. He joins us live now. And Guad, the beach where this happened is pretty popular. There was already a pretty big police presence out there because they expected it to be crowded. Tell us more about the details we're learning today about this.
Hallie, they did. Authorities say there was thousands of people on the beach when this happened late Monday afternoon on this holiday. And, as we speak to the witnesses, one of the things they keep saying is that there was a large number of families and children. And we now know that of the 9 that were struck by gunfire, 4 are minors. Now, police have informed, as you mentioned, that they have recovered a number of handguns. We also know that 2 individuals were arrested. So what we know from police is that they had initially detained 1 individual, which was named as a person of interest. That was as of yesterday. Today, they informed that right after this happened, authorities were able to arrive and speak to a group of individuals. Now, that group of individuals, then 2 of them were those that were arrested on gun-related charges, Hallie. So they do inform that they have not yet been identified as the shooters, but they are detained on these gun-related charges. You mentioned the handguns. So they recovered 5 of those 5 handguns. We are being told that 2 are stolen stolen, one reported stolen in Texas, another one in Florida. But as we speak to more and more witnesses here who saw what happened, the fact that there were so many families when this took place and they saw kids running away is something that also created some trauma with some of the people that were witnesses. Here's one of the witnesses speaking about what happened.
Really, the scariest part was really just seeing parents dragging their children almost like across the floor to get behind the small wall barrier that was literally the only protection that anyone had from just trying to stay clear of all the chaos that was going on.
I mean, and the youngest child to be struck by a bullet was 1 year-old. And 3 others are also minors, Hallie.
Yeah, how are they doing?
So as of this morning, local hospital officials gave us an update. So of the 9 people, we know that three of the adults have been discharged from the hospital, according to the hospital officials, and 2 adults remain in the hospital, as well as the 4 minors. Now, the good news is that all 6 that remain in the hospital, the 4 minors and the 2 adults, are all in stable condition as of this morning, Hallie.
Guad Venegas live for us there in Hollywood, Florida. Guad, thank you so much. Some of the biggest names in AI are out with a very serious siren tonight, warning that the risks of the tech that they built are on par with maybe the next pandemic or even nuclear war. The just 22-word statement from nearly 400 experts says, quote, that I'm reading the quote here, you can see it on screen, mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks like pandemics and nuclear war. It's not just anybody saying this stuff, right? These are top leaders, researchers, engineers, people from OpenAI. By the way, OpenAI makes ChatGPT. There's Google's AI arm that's there, another big company in this space. The letter's even getting signed by 2 of the so-called godfathers of AI who won the annual Computing Prize, the Turing Award, for the work that they did. NBC's Ken Delaney is covering this for us. Can I start with the key question here, right? Because this is like a DEFCON 1 siren from these people saying, like, we got to be careful about this thing. From the people who developed the technology in the first place, right? Like, how is the mathing on that?
That is a key question, Hallie. I saw one tweet about this that likened it to a car manufacturer telling the public the sports car they're selling is dangerously fast and you may not be able to handle it. It really does seem like these people are caught between, sort of capitalism and their own ethics. They're all rushing to compete to dominate what promises to be an incredibly lucrative market, even as they're sort of begging the government or the public or somebody to put up some guardrails to protect against the scary dangers. And those scary dangers, as we know, include everything from misinformation and manipulation of public opinion to, in the short term, to, machine seizing control in the long term. I mean, the fear here is that AI is improving so fast, it's already surpassed human performance in some areas and has shown signs of advanced abilities and understanding. And look, if machines are smarter than us and start to think on their own, why wouldn't they put their own interests over ours? That's the fear.
What do they want to see done, right? So they're sounding this alarm. What do they want people to do about it? Because I understand that there is, and you lay this out, right? There is some nuance to this, that this technology was like probably going to come anyway. You got to try to put some guardrails around it. What do those guardrails actually look like?
Well, back in March, another group of technology leaders proposed a pause on AI development for 6 months. So that's one idea. A lot of these same leaders are also calling for some sort of federal regulations. We have regulations that ban human cloning for ethical reasons. And even though doing that could push science forward, nobody thinks regulating AI would be easy. But for starters, there are proposals, for example, that AI developers should be required to obtain a government license. And, there are efforts inside the government already underway, Hallie. The Commerce Department in April began soliciting public comment on potential rules for AI.
Ken Delaney, and fascinating stuff. Thank you very much for walking us through it. In the first day of a trial for the man charged in that 2018 mass shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue, federal prosecutors say the shooter moved to, I'm quoting here, methodically find the Jews he hated so much. Shooting killed 11 people, the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in American history. The alleged shooter's attorney didn't deny the defendant actually did it, actually was behind this attack, but instead chose to focus on why he did this, saying there's more to the story than just a hatred for Jewish people. The alleged shooter faces 63 charges, including 11 hate crimes related to those who died. You see their faces, their names on screen here. Federal prosecutors want the death penalty. The defendants pleaded not guilty. The White House, not too long ago, saying that they're gathering information about who may have been responsible for that extraordinary drone strike that hit Moscow today, with the administration holding firm that it does not support attacks inside Russia. Listen.
We have been focused on providing Ukraine, as you've heard from the president, as you've heard from National Security Advisor and many colleagues from the NSC, my colleagues from the NSC, with the equipment and training they need to retake their own sovereign territory.
Let me show you some of the damage here. You had buildings in Moscow attacked for the first time since this invasion of Ukraine began. With Ukraine, if you're wondering, well, was Ukraine behind it? Ukraine says it had nothing directly to do with the attack, but was happy to see it. The attack in Moscow follows another overnight barrage in the capital city of Kyiv, with drones attacking there. One person was killed. Hallie is joining us now. Big question, Hallie, right? If Ukraine says it wasn't them, who was it that did this drone attack on Moscow?
Well, I mean, that's the $64,000 question. But Ukraine traditionally have never taken any responsibility for attacks that have happened in Russia. They said they don't know who's behind it. It could be Russian separatists. I guess it's part of their policy not to, but they were certainly very happy about it, Hallie. President Zelensky's advisor said that, you know, we were watching with much happiness these drones hitting Moscow, and he anticipated that there was more to come. So who did it? We're not sure, but the Ukrainians are certainly very happy about it. And it certainly rattled Muscovites. And don't forget, since the beginning of this war, Vladimir Putin has been telling Russians that you're safe from any Ukrainian attacks. They can't strike this deep into Russia. You have nothing to worry about. And there you are this morning at the crack of dawn being attacked by drones. Now, the damage wasn't very significant, as you pointed out, some broken windows and blackened facades. But psychologically, the damage is quite serious. It's basically telling the Russians that the Ukrainians can penetrate their defenses, can hit the capital, which is so well guarded. And this is all coming before this very much anticipated offensive by the Ukrainians. So not a good day for the Kremlin.
In Ukraine, right, we talked about that barrage in Kyiv. That's like the second time in 24 hours we've talked about a major barrage in Ukraine. It is actually the 17th round of airstrikes in that city this month alone. It is a renewed stress, it seems, on people there a year plus into this war.
Definitely, Hallie. I mean, look, it happens so often there. There have been 17 attacks in Kyiv in the month of May alone. And, you know, although it happens to the Ukrainians almost on a daily basis, you can't really say they get used to it, because it is an extremely stressful event. As soon as those bombs or drones come towards Kyiv or any other city in Ukraine, the air raid sirens go. People have to scramble to get to a basement somewhere. They have to, you know, tuck their kids underneath their arms and run for cover somewhere, and it's extraordinarily stressful. And this month in particular, it's been happening almost every day. So even though it happens so often, people don't get used to it. And I think people in Moscow got a taste of what people in Kyiv have been experiencing.
Hallie, thank you so much. I appreciate your reporting there for us. Coming up here on the show, officials are looking for a woman who's been missing for weeks after allegedly going on a road trip with her boyfriend. What a new police report just out is telling us tonight. Plus, the disgraced Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes finally reporting to prison today after a bunch of delays. What we know about where she's serving time next. Within just the last few hours, the Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes walked into an all-female minimum security federal prison in Texas to start her 11-year sentence after several attempts to try to delay going in the first place. Remember, in January of last year, a jury found her guilty of defrauding investors of about $145 million. She founded Theranos 20 years ago, roughly, to diagnose medical conditions through a blood test. But a lot of the claims that the company made turned out to not be true. So now, what's life going to look like for Elizabeth Holmes? She'll have to wake up at 6 a.m. She'll work a job that pays as little as 12 cents an hour. She'll share bathing space, right? Bathrooms with other inmates. The hundreds of female inmates there are convicted of mainly white-collar crimes. Even Real Housewives of Salt Lake City star Jennifer Shah is serving her own sentence there for a fraud scheme. I want to bring in NBC's legal analyst, Danny Savalas. The day is here for Elizabeth Holmes. We have reported now for months, I believe, weeks if not months, that she's been trying to push back this day. She was pregnant. She has a newborn. She was trying to, of course, delay the time when she'd have to actually report. How did we get here? Will she have to serve the whole sentence? How does this work?
The federal system has abolished parole, so there's no half of the time served and then she'll go before a parole board. That's in state court. That hasn't been the case in federal court in a long time. So federal prisoners generally serve almost all of their sentence. You do get a 54-day reduction for each year, which comes out to about 15%, or you'll end up serving 85% of your sentence if you are qualified for good time served. But that is the only applicable reduction in prison time. There's some others for drug and alcohol addicts, but that doesn't appear to apply in the case of Elizabeth Holmes. Other than that, all federal prisoners serve at least 85% of their total sentences.
Danny Savalas, interesting stuff. Big, obviously, moment for Elizabeth Holmes and for her former company. Appreciate it. Right now, police are searching for a 33-year-old woman now missing for weeks after disappearing during a cross-country trip with her boyfriend. Nikki Michelle Alcaraz was last seen in early May in New Mexico with her boyfriend, Stephen Tyler Stratton. And we are just now seeing a police report of an alleged altercation between Alcaraz and her boyfriend from May 4th, just days before she disappeared. Take a look. Police are now posting missing person posters for her. You can see one of them right here. A couple of them, actually. Her brother telling our team that a truck driver saw Stratton beating Alcaraz in New Mexico and called the police just days before she disappeared.
He gets aggressive. I didn't know the extent of it until recently, but, you know, I know that none of us really liked him to begin with, but you can't tell Nikki anything.
The case drawing some eerie similarities to that of Gabby Petito, the 22-year-old woman who was killed by her fiancé when they went on a cross-country road trip. She had been seen on body cam video telling police about an altercation she'd had with Brian Laundrie in what's believed to be just the days before she was killed. Stephen Romo is following all of this for us and joining us now. We don't know, right? Like, we don't want to overstate any potential similarities between the Gabby Petito case and this one here. But again, the cross-country road trip, the potential of some sort of an altercation with the person she had been with. We're now seeing this police report from the Alcaraz incident on May 4th, which is just days before she went missing. Tell us more.
Yeah, Hallie, a lot of coincidences, similarities to the Gabby Petito case, but it is important to point out that in this situation, the boyfriend, Stephen Tyler Stratton, is not considered a suspect or person of interest at all right now. In fact, this is still considered a missing persons case. It is not considered a kidnapping. Important to point that out, but concern is definitely growing. You mentioned that domestic violence incident that happened back on May 4th. 4 days later, it was the last time that the family actually heard from Alcaraz. And we've actually talked to that family. We've talked to the family of Mr. Stratton, not addressing the domestic violence situation, but both families saying they desperately want their loved one home. Here's more of what Alcaraz's family had to say.
She's very consistent on contacting family and friends, you know, no more than a day or two. She normally go without some kind of contact, and they haven't heard from her for now going on almost 3 weeks. Yeah, we're just very concerned as to what's going on and where she is.
All right, and Hallie, some late-breaking news in this case. We actually know the couple was spotted on surveillance video in a Walmart in Northern California. That information is from the Redding Police Department. They say that it appears that Alcaraz was selling her phone, which may be one of the likely reasons her family has not been able to get in contact with her. But they also say that she is still considered missing. Her whereabouts are unknown right now, and there is a lot of concern due to the domestic situation. Of course, that's what authorities want to point out. They do believe Alcaraz may be in danger due to that situation, Hallie.
Stephen Romo, thank you very much. Lots to follow on that one. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, former First Lady Rosalynn Carter has been diagnosed with dementia, according to the Carter Center. She's 95 years old. She's at home with her husband, former President Jimmy Carter, who's been getting hospice care since February. The Carter family writing Rosalynn spent much of her life as one of the country's leading mental health advocates, and that it was making this announcement, revealing this diagnosis publicly to try to reduce the stigma. Number 2, officials in Nova Scotia declaring a state of emergency, warning that wildfires there, look at this, are out of control. Something like 18,000 people now have to evacuate, with these fires burning 25,000 acres, damaging 200-plus buildings. Number 3, a new report from the CDC says that 40% of the sicknesses we get from food in restaurants can be traced directly from a sick employee. According to the study, a lot of restaurants don't have really good sick leave policies, meaning workers are more likely to show up if they don't feel good and maybe handle food, even if they're symptomatic. Interesting stuff. Number 4, the market value of computer chip maker NVIDIA passed $1 trillion today. Why is that so significant? Why is that so newsy? Not many companies have that kind of value. There's a very small club. Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, the biggies. NVIDIA's stock has tripled in value, mostly because it makes 80% of the chips that are used to run AI tech.
Life in prison, even the death penalty for being gay? In Uganda tonight, that's reality, after President Yoweri Museveni signed one of the world's most draconian anti-gay laws, triggering an international backlash, threats of punishment from the U.S., and fears of other African nations following Uganda into an LGBT crackdown.
This is not where I would like to be.
This Ugandan LGBT activist had to flee their country, now living in exile.
You are arresting us for literally doing nothing, for simply existing. But where are we supposed to go? How did we become refugees in our own countries?
The new law punishes gay sex with a life sentence for the crime of promoting homosexuality, 20 years. It was watered down from an earlier version that criminalized merely identifying as LGBTQ. But this version imposes even harsher penalties for what it calls aggravated homosexuality, same-sex relations involving children, people with HIV, or other vulnerable people.
When you commit aggravated homosexuality, the law says you shall be liable to suffer death. Museveni!
Across the globe, outrage. President Biden calling it shameful. The U.S. saying it will directly impede American aid to Uganda, including in fighting HIV/AIDS.
The enactment of Uganda's Anti-Homosexuality Act is a tragic violation of human rights, of universal human rights.
Even Republican Senator Ted Cruz, not known as a champion of LGBT rights, calling it grotesque, an abomination, while Secretary of State Antony Blinken threatens visa bans on Ugandan officials. But in Uganda, the law's chief backer brushing off U.S. threats.
Let all of us be subjected. In fact, let all Ugandans be denied visas to America, Canada, and the European Union.
As Ugandan lawyers challenge the law in constitutional court, other African nations may follow Uganda's example. Already, 32 of Africa's 54 nations criminalize homosexuality. Those countries make up nearly half of the 67 countries globally where being gay is a crime. In Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana, there are campaigns underway to replicate the new Ugandan law.
We are delighted to know that Uganda has been able to set the pace. It's a good thing that other countries are also taking up this issue.
Josh Letterman is joining us now. And it's such important reporting, Josh. I'm struck by the person who said, I'm a refugee now in my own country here. You talk about how more than half of African nations criminalize same-sex relationships here. Obviously, death penalty, extreme end of this. But talk about the comparison to punishments that people face in other African nations who are LGBTQ+.
Yeah, it really varies across the continent, Hallie. There are a handful of other countries in addition to this one that do have Sharia law as part of their criminal systems and therefore do have the death penalty on the books as a potential punishment for homosexuality. Then there are other countries like Tanzania and Sudan where they have a life sentence as the maximum punishment available under the law for gay sex acts. But then there are countries that have more limited measures, such as Tanzania, where it is illegal to provide condoms and lube to centers that deal, for example, with HIV/AIDS infection. But it's not just about the formal laws on the books, Hallie, because even in countries in Africa where there are not laws that explicitly outlaw homosexuality, there are very high rates of homophobic crime and even violence targeting LGBTQ people. And on the flip side of this, only one country in the entire continent has legalized same-sex marriage. That country is South Africa. Hallie?
Josh Letterman, thank you very much. Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis officially kicking off his 2024 campaign at a rally in Iowa tonight. Let's call it his first formal rally since his formal kickoff, as you probably remember, took a few twists and turns. What new polls out just today are showing as far as the matchup between him and Donald Trump. Plus, a U.S. tennis star says racist abuse online is getting worse. What the French Open's doing to try to stop it, coming up. Just about an hour from now, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will officially kick off his 2024 campaign with his first rally in Iowa, hoping to get back some of his balance after a bit of a stumble in last week's messy, glitchy Twitter Spaces launch. Of course, his people don't see it that way. They think he broke the internet, right? But here we are, rally number one, the first official trip of his as a candidate in the presidential race in that key early caucusing state. Take a look at where DeSantis is going to be spending some of his time here. New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina. He's launching a multi-million-dollar ground game in those states. His team says is among the biggest, or could be, in presidential campaign history. The ramping up of this campaign comes as the governor has seen himself slip in polling with his biggest rival, former President Donald Trump. Had a 3-point lead, depending on the polling, back in February, to now trailing by more than 20% in a head-to-head matchup, hypothetically, in a poll out today. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is with the governor in Des Moines, Iowa. So vibe check, right? He's meeting with 15 local pastors tonight before this speech, which I think tells us something about what we are going to hear tonight as the governor has leaned into these so-called sort of culture war issues, quote unquote, traditional values, et cetera.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. Look, the governor has been hammering at these culture war issues for some time now, but he is escalating those attacks against former President Trump, and we're expecting to hear from him here in just a short time at this church just west of Des Moines. And as you said, he's meeting with more than a dozen local pastors right before this speech, and we expect him to lean heavily on those culture wars and also to establish a sort of contrast between him and the former president. And as you know, Hallie, he had not engaged former President Trump quite a bit before he jumped into this race, but within the last few days, he has really been trying to establish that contrast. And I spoke with a pastor earlier this afternoon. I talked to him about that ongoing feud with Disney and why it might actually play well here in Iowa among evangelical voters. Take a listen to what that pastor told me.
DeSantis is framing the issue for evangelicals the right way. We don't see this as, you know, a battle between DeSantis and Disney. It's a battle for children. It's a battle for protecting children from an ideology that the majority of parents in the United States do not want to be thrust upon their children.
And again, Hallie, this is not just about Disney, but DeSantis and his team see this as a larger battle. You recall, of course, those brands such as Bud Light, Kohl's, and Target now facing backlash for those marketing campaigns aimed at LGBTQ shoppers and customers. The DeSantis campaign sees this overall, quote, war on woke as playing very well here in Iowa. And, of course, evangelical voters critical to the GOP primary here, Hallie.
You know, one thing that I've heard from people in the DeSantis orbit has been that, yeah, there is a bit of it, as we talk about some of this new polling, Gabe, like an altitude descent, right? And they say, well, that's not unexpected. Like, these things happen. It is still a long campaign. And yes, fact check, it is still a long campaign, right? But the bottom line is, I think they'd love to see better numbers. Like, I mean, anybody would, right? At this point, Donald Trump still has a grip on the Republican Party. You have seen DeSantis start to ramp up his attacks on Mr. Trump. Still subtle, but there is a ramping up on that. Donald Trump's been very clear about his feelings on Ron DeSantis. He doesn't like him. He doesn't want him to beat him.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. And look, the new poll says the majority of Republicans do think that Trump is the strongest nominee against Biden. But, Hallie, something to watch for tonight. We have been seeing just in the last day or so this back and forth between Governor DeSantis trying to paint Donald Trump as to his left on Disney, saying that he is siding with Disney, that DeSantis saying Trump is, and Trump immediately firing back and saying that is not the case and trying to then move to DeSantis's right. So this is now an ongoing battle between these two frontrunners. But yes, as you point out, Donald Trump way ahead in the national polling. DeSantis' team thinks that it is the state-by-state polling that will now tighten now that he's formally in this race, Hallie.
Gabe Gutierrez live for us there in Des Moines, Iowa, the first of many stops for you this campaign season, my friend. Thank you. Good to see you. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Southern Bureau, you know those blobs of seaweed on the coast in South Florida? A new study shows they have high amounts of a rare flesh-eating bacteria, and when that stuff interacts with like plastic, like trash, it can create what's being called a perfect pathogen storm. It can make people really sick from things like eating seafood or coming into contact if that stuff comes into contact with a cut or a wound, so stay away from it, please. Out of our Midwest Bureau, horse racing officials are holding an emergency summit today after 12 horses died at Churchill Downs over the past month. The Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority Board saying in a statement that each death will be investigated and that there will be a review of Churchill Downs racing and training surfaces. All of it coming right before the Belmont Stakes, which starts June 10th. And out of our Southern Bureau, the Miami Heat headed to the NBA Finals after beating the Boston Celtics. Remember, like on this show 24 hours ago, we talked about that historic run by Boston, the only team to ever go from down 0-3 basically in a series to like a Game 7. Turns out Boston could not make history, right? They lost to the Heat. Now the Heat's going to go play the #1 seeded Denver Nuggets on Thursday. Miami could make history itself, though. They're just the second #8 seed to make it to the finals. Could become the first #8 seed to win it all. We shall see. A U.S. tennis star tonight is opening up about how racist abuse online is getting worse as she makes it into the next round of the French Open. Now, tournament officials are rolling out some new tech to try to filter out some of those hateful comments online. Sloane Stevens is telling reporters that she's constantly found herself a target of racist attacks on the internet. Listen.
It's obviously been a problem my entire career. It has never stopped. People online have the free reign to say and do whatever they want behind fake pages, which is obviously very troublesome.
She's not the only one. We know that big tennis stars like Serena and Venus Williams and Naomi Osaka have all talked about their own struggles on how to deal with online hate. And it's gotten to a point now where tournament officials are bringing in some of this new tech to try to help, with the French Tennis Federation giving all players a software called Bodyguard AI. It's meant to filter out stuff like racist and homophobic comments online during the French Open. Ron Allen is joining us now to talk about it. Ron, it is an unfortunate reality that some of this horrific abuse for celebrities, for major athletes, is something that they have to contend with now. What is new here is what the French Open is doing about it, trying to give some tools, at least to the players, to filter out some of what they're seeing, even if they can't stop the underlying stuff in the first place.
Right. And what's also new is that more athletes and others in the society generally are talking about mental health and talking about trying to do things to have a better performance at their competitions and so forth. You know, it's one thing if somebody's hurling insults at you from the stands. It's another thing if they're doing it online. So this Bodyguard AI, as it's called, is a software that the players can download, and it essentially tries to create a safe space around social media accounts, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, everything else. And the Tennis Federation, tournament organizers, others also can load it on their pages, and it blocks out hateful content. It supposedly does it in real time. It does it in numerous languages, which is helpful. And it also does daily reports and identifies sites that are posting this stuff, which all sounds miraculous, but they say it's going to work and it's going to help. Sloane Stevens said that she was aware of this, that she hadn't tried it just yet. But she was skeptical, saying that, you know, there are so many ways to evade this, with asterisks or with other kinds of ways to devise to get around things being blocked online. But perhaps she's going to try it. Others are going to try it. The French Open runs for a couple of weeks, so we'll see if this works. But this is the first Grand Slam tournament. It's the first major sport that I've heard of that's trying to do something, and you have to give them credit for that.
Pull on the thread, because you mentioned the performance aspect here, right? There was sort of pressure from some of this hate that they have to face, this abuse that these players have to face, and how that translates to what they're able to do on the court.
Yeah, it can be debilitating, and it seems to be getting worse in terms of racist attacks. Here's someone from the Tennis Channel, Andrew Krasny, talking about how he sees more stars talking about this sort of stuff. Take a listen.
the fact that Sloan is talking about it, it's about time, and it's not new. Sloan's been talking about it for years. Naomi Osaka's been talking about it for years. Richard Williams, Venus and Serena's father, has been talking about it for years before social media has even come out. But racism is rampant.
It is, and again, there's this new tool out. The French Open runs for a couple of weeks. We'll see how many players try to use it, how helpful it is. But again, it's really saying something that this tournament is stepping up and saying, we have to deal with this. And again, it's very different from trying to stop unruly fans who you can see and you can police and you can throw out of the stadium. This is something different, and ultimately it could lead to tracking down the perpetrators and legal action, who knows what. But hopefully it'll just help players have more peace of mind and perform better, which is what we all want to see, of course.
Ron Allen, thank you very much for that reporting. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the show, a new twist in the LA Dodgers Pride Night controversy. Its superstar pitcher says he does not agree with the team's decision to honor an LGBTQ+ group, and that he pushed for the announcement of a different theme day because of it. We've got that next. So Clayton Kershaw, the superstar pitcher for the LA Dodgers, is sharing in a new interview the team is bringing back Faith Night after he says he was uncomfortable with the team's decision to re-invite a provocative LGBTQ+ group to the team's Pride Night event next month. Kershaw telling the LA Times he disagrees with the decision to welcome the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, saying he doesn't agree with making fun of other people's religions. You can see the quote. He says, I just think that no matter what, that shouldn't happen. We've mentioned this whole controversy on the show, right? The group satirizes Catholic imagery, some dressing up as nuns, trying to raise money and awareness for LGBTQ+ related issues. You see the timeline here, right? How the Dodgers announced that the group would get an award and then uninvited them because of backlash from some conservatives, including, by the way, from here in D.C., Senator Marco Rubio, for example. Then they re-invited them after there was backlash from the gay community in L.A. And at Kershaw's insistence, apparently, the team sped up announcing a relaunch of that Christian Faith Night that had been put on pause because of COVID. That'll be in July. Dana Griffin joins us now from Los Angeles. And what is so interesting about this story, Dana, is the intersection of sports and the so-called culture wars here, right? Kershaw is somebody who is outspoken about his faith. In this interview at the Times, he said, it's not about like the LGBTQ+ community. He says it's just this particular group and the sort of satirization of the Catholic faith.
That's right, Hallie. He was adamant that this has nothing to do with LGBTQ community groups, but he is offended by this particular group, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, because of the way they dress up in the satirical nun costume. They paint their faces. But this is a charity organization that says that they go out to try to support issues that plague other groups so that everyone feels included. So Kershaw actually approached the Dodgers organization to try to speed up the announcement for the Christian Faith and Family Day, which was expected to happen later. And so for him, this was his response. He says that he didn't want to focus on what he did not stand for, but wanted to highlight what he does as a Christian player. You know, his wife, they both have a charity organization. And his statement that he put out during this interview was that as a follower of Christ, we are supposed to love everybody well. And I think that that means being able to be at a lot of different places and be able to be part of a lot of different things. And he said that because he says he's not planning to boycott the Pride Day event on the 16th, but he wants to highlight the fact that the Dodgers will also be highlighting the Christian faith as well, Hallie.
You know, there is a broader piece to this, Dana, the way that sports teams are trying to navigate some of these Pride Nights. This is not the first Pride Night controversy we've seen, with Pride Night coming up just in a couple days here.
Yeah, there's actually now a spotlight on NHL Pride events.
That's right.
The National Hockey League, because some players are also citing their Christian beliefs. So you've got the Florida Panthers players and brothers, Eric and Mark Stahl, who did not participate in the pregame warm-up on Thursday because the team wore these Pride-themed jerseys, and they cited their religious beliefs. But you've also got the Chicago Blackhawks. They actually have a Russian player, like a lot of NHL teams do, and they said that wearing those Pride-themed jerseys, which would have been similar to what the Florida Panthers did, would possibly put their player at risk and to others two other people associated with the team, because once they go back to Russia, you know, and Russia has anti-gay laws. So for them, the decision was based on the safety of their players and others associated with the team. But then you've got other people who are citing religious beliefs. You've got Nationals pitcher Trevor Williams. He tweeted something about creating an environment in which one group feels celebrated and honored at the expense of another is counterproductive. And he was referring to the Dodgers controversy with the sisters. And he also added that he believes it is essential for the Dodgers to reconsider their association with this group. So, Hallie, it'll be a talker. Again, that event, the Pride event here in Los Angeles, will take place on June 16th.
Dana Griffin, thank you very much, live for us from L.A. That does it for us for this hour. We've got more coverage picking up right now. We are coming on the air with the sales pitch and the test ahead for President Biden and Speaker McCarthy on their deal to try to stop a potential global economic meltdown. It looks like they may have the votes, at least in one committee that we're just hearing about in the last hour, what a key Republican now says, and where this all goes next to make sure the U.S. can pay its bills on time. Also tonight, here's a question, rhetorical, obviously. If somebody is still alive inside a building, should you tear it down? Because that literally almost happened in Davenport, Iowa, with officials at almost the last minute calling off plans to demolish a partially collapsed apartment building. Tonight, major questions about accountability, what our team is hearing from family members who still cannot find their loved ones inside. Plus, we're live in Florida, where police now say they have a new suspect in custody after a Memorial Day shooting that hurt 9 people. Just ahead, the new video we're getting from the moments after the attack. Then a pretty scary warning from 2 AI creators, why they say the tech that they made could cause a global extinction on par with nuclear war. And what we're just learning about a missing woman apparently spotted in Northern California. The details on that case coming up later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and tonight we start with breaking news out of Capitol Hill. A brand new signal in just the last hour that bill that would make sure the U.S. can pay its bills on time will actually, maybe, probably move to the House floor. Let me stay out of the weeds, but I want to show you this key meeting. It's happening right now. It's called the Rules Committee. You don't have to remember that. That's not going to be on the pop quiz. But why it matters, they're kind of a gatekeeper to the rest of the House floor. It's got to get through this committee for everybody else to vote on it. There was a question mark, even like 2 hours ago, about whether or not that would happen. Would this committee actually say, okay, everybody else can go vote on this plan? Turns out, one key Republican is making clear where he stands, which is a pretty big signal. Listen.
I want to see the rule. It's not printed yet. It's not been read. But I anticipate voting for this rule. And for when people want to express their ideology, the floor of the House on the actual final passage of the bill is the place to do that.
Okay, so that's Congressman Massey. He was kind of the key guy, at least for this part of the process. There was a little question mark. Was he going to be in favor of doing what he did, moving this to the House floor or not? Now we know where he stands. We're still waiting on that official vote, but it does mean it is a signal of another step forward now for this deal. It is a deal that both President Biden and Speaker McCarthy have to sell, because they got to get the green light from everybody, or at least enough members of Congress for this to actually pass. Remember, it has to pass by June 5th, or else the government will default on the debt that it owes. That's really bad. That would be like global economic crisis level. Okay, so they've got, 6 days now? There is a little bit of skepticism from both sides of the aisle. You've got some conservative hardliners even floating the idea of trying to take down Kevin McCarthy over all this, according to a couple sources familiar with telling NBC News. The clock is ticking, right? Timeline here, this is where we're at. Rules Committee. Again, don't have to remember Rules Committee. Bottom line is like this key meeting here, fine, today. This sets up maybe tomorrow night, as early as tomorrow night, the full House voting. You know we'll be covering that tomorrow night. Senate comes after that. Timeline TBD. There could be some drama there. We'll see in the days to come. And then, of course, that so-called X date, right? June 5th, less than a week away, when the U.S. is apparently going to run out of money, according to the Treasury Department, to pay its bills. Remember, this is a deal that's going to have real impacts on real people. It will basically tighten up some federal funding. It suspends the debt ceiling for 2 years. That means that, the U.S. doesn't have to worry about how much it borrows to pay off its debt. There's this thing that's controversial. Let me find it here. Increasing the age requirements for food stamp work requirements. This is something that people on the left, some progressives, do not like. So bookmark that. And then there's something that people on the right, the conservative hardliners, do not like. And that's basically kind of the rest of it, which is they don't think it cuts enough from the budget. There's also this. You might care about this, especially if you have student loans or know somebody who does. This agreement means that you're going to have to start repaying those federal student loans after the pandemic pause later on this summer. I want to bring in Sahil Kapoor, who's live for us on Capitol Hill. Okay, fine. Fuss the setup, Sahil. I mean, 4.5 minutes, but worth it, my friend. Talk about this make-or-break meeting that's happening now and the signals that, yes, this will probably go to the full House. It looks like this process is moving forward, right?
Hallie, this bill does look like it's in good shape to pass the House Rules Committee. As you point out, Tom Massey seems to be the clincher here. That committee has 9 Republicans. 6 of them are allies of Kevin McCarthy, whose votes were never really in question. If Massey joins them, that is a majority of the panel, regardless of what everyone else does. There are 2 Republicans on that committee who appear very critical of this bill, whose votes are not being taken for granted, Ralph Norman and Chip Roy, but they're not going to be needed. Every Democrat can vote no on this bill as well in that committee, and it will still pass. So what happens next? Then it goes to the floor of the House tomorrow, where it's expected to get a vote. It needs a majority of the chamber. Now, Democratic votes are expected to be in play here. This is a deal cut by President Biden and Speaker McCarthy. Democrats are heavily invested in it, but they expect Republicans to supply most of the vote. After all, it was McCarthy and his allies who are in the negotiating room, and it is a Republican-controlled House. Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, said he expects Kevin McCarthy to deliver at least 2/3 of the necessary vote, which is about 150 Republicans. How is McCarthy trying to sell this to his hardliners? Let's play what he had to say.
Have you had any conversations with members of the Freedom Caucus that have been against this bill and now are saying they might vote motion to vacate?
I've talked to many about whether they're for or against the bill. I'm not sure what in the bill people are concerned about. It is the largest savings of $2.1 trillion we've ever had.
Now, Democrats in my conversations are being a little bit coy about how they're going to vote. They don't want to make it too easy for McCarthy. They do want to put some pressure on him, make him sweat it out, make sure he delivers his share of the vote. But they're so invested in this, Hallie. They want to stop an economic meltdown, and they do not want to deliver what would be a humiliating defeat to President Biden that could redefine his legacy.
Reporting that's been coming out about the potential that there are some conservative hardliners who may want to make this really tough for Kevin McCarthy, meaning they may try to put his speakership at risk here, maybe make a motion to vacate. It's called motion to vacate, a motion to pull him off as speaker. Is that real? Is that just in the background and not really bubbling? Give us a gut check on that.
Yeah, we can realistically call it the motion to overthrow the speaker. You know, the name of this tool is a little bit confusing, but that's ultimately what it is. Now, yes, that is on the line for Speaker McCarthy. The stakes are enormous for him here. His job is on the line. His legacy is on the line. Is he going to be seen as an effective speaker or one who, barreled the country into an economic calamity? His political capital is also on the line here. If he shows he can cut a complicated deal with Democrats on an issue that his party is always angsty about, every time for the last 12 years this has come up that I've covered it, Republicans have, demanded some concessions. They've been uneasy about this vote. If McCarthy proves he can pull it off in this divided government with this narrow majority, he will be in good shape for the next year and a half or so, at least till the end of this term. There's a lot of talk, Hallie, from McCarthy allies about how people keep underestimating him. People keep underestimating him. If he pulls this off, they will have a point.
Sahil Kapoor, thank you very much. Appreciate the reporting. Let's take you now to Davenport, Iowa, where you're about to see some new drone video of that partially collapsed apartment building. The city's mayor saying in the last couple hours that 5 people are still unaccounted for. Look at this. 2 people may actually be inside this building. This is a community, Davenport, where so many people are angry right now because of a plan that would have torn down the building, even though what you just saw has happened. I'm going to go back to that shot. A 52-year-old woman. There she is. She was found alive inside, even after the city called off the search mission. But the family of Lisa Brooks, the woman who's yelling out the window there, they say she's disabled. She was hiding apparently under pillows in her bathtub for more than a full day. So let's spell that out, exactly why people are so angry, right? Even more clearly here. Even with the family of at least one person saying their loved one was still missing, the city had still planned to demolish the building. You're seeing right there the city's fire marshal, dabbing away tears, getting a little choked up, talking about how this whole process has played out.
You can't run up to a pile of bricks and rocks and just start throwing things off. As much as we want to get everybody out, and we want to do it right now.
So So here's what we're learning tonight. Pretty much every official who's talked with members of the media says this building is in imminent danger of falling down. One of them was like, we could walk out of this news conference and it could already be on the ground. But how this collapse happened, that is still TBD. There's no cause just yet. And right now, they say the door is still open to a criminal investigation for the building's owner, per the city. Nothing's been set in stone just yet, but that is apparently on the table. Our Maggie Vespa speaking with the sister of a man who is still missing. Listen.
They have not exhausted all means to make sure everybody is out of there. How many more people are in there suffering? Yes, not only with my brother.
Maggie is joining us now live from Davenport. And Maggie, we talk about the accountability factor here, right? And this is a question that you pushed on. How the city went from thinking, oh, nobody's in there, we're going to like probably tear it down in the morning. We talked about that 24 hours ago, to finding Lisa Brooks alive overnight, right? Talk us through how that happened.
I mean, they basically, Hallie, found Lisa Brooks alive overnight because Lisa waved out her window. As you saw in that video, they learned with everybody else and kind of said, I mean, frankly, oh my God, there's still someone inside, again, that building on the 4th story. And they told us prior to that they had done, they now say 2 searches, 2, with dogs, with drones, with infrared technology. They say these searches were thorough, and they were as thorough and kind of in the weeds, basically, as they can be safely with a pile of rubble like that, which they say, by the way, the rubble is now holding up the building, so the structural concerns are real. When we asked about the demolition plans, and we said, okay, you said you wanted to demolish this morning, then Lisa pops out of her window. What happens then? And they said, well, you know, it was kind of always in flux. We're always evaluating a situation like this. The building could fall. And I said, okay, but it's very different to realize someone's inside. Like, then plans change in a very different way. Here's part of that exchange today.
Did demolition plans change when it became very clear that there are people still in the...
Absolutely. There's new information that comes up. We had no indications from any of the responders that we had, any of our tools, any of the canines at that time.
So now, basically, what happens? Well, the demolition is completely in flux. There is now no date set. They basically tell us they've been bringing in a little bit of equipment to kind of sort of set the stage for if and when they want to do this. But they're also now, in the meantime, first and foremost, planning another search. This would be a third search. And Hallie, this time they want to bring in all the resources again and add, they say, scanning drones is how they describe them, that are basically really adept at sifting through debris piles. So perhaps even more thorough, and just given all the tension on the ground, that's what they want to focus on.
Can you help me understand something? And I want to pull that thread on tension for a second, but just just watching that exchange closely, right? Like, and I understand they say there was no indication from the responders who went in there that there was anybody else alive in that building. Hadn't the family been saying all along that they thought that Lisa Brooks could be in there?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, essentially, yeah, there is a lot of confusion on the ground. There are a number of things that kind of haven't added up this entire time. Like, number one, or sort of one of them, you hit on it toward the top. They now say there are 5 people unaccounted for, 2 could be in that pile. And we said, okay, what about the other 3? And they said, well, this is obviously not a well-managed building. That's kind of at the core of this story. And they said the problem is we think we're working with an outdated list of residents. So the other 3, we don't actually think they lived in that building, but that's the list we have. That's all we have to go on. So the information that's been coming in, suffice it to say, it's through a number of informal pipelines that have added to a lot of confusion. Families say they tried to say, hey, we have someone in that building. It was basically hard for authorities to verify. So they've been going through one by one, case by case. And they say it's taken a while. Families are fed up, though. They say this shouldn't have taken this long, and demolition should have never been talked about while all of this was in flux, Hallie.
You said something important there, too. You talked about how at the core of this, and you're right, this story, it is that this is not a well-managed building, right? It was clearly not a well-managed building, according to what city officials are saying. So, like, what I'm looking at the building behind you, that's probably somebody's fault, right? Like, something happened. There wasn't an earthquake that created this, caused this building to collapse. What do we know about that piece of it?
Yeah, so essentially I asked the city, I said, so who failed people? Like, people outside are pretty clear that someone failed them. That is a failure, right? That is an objective failure by at least one person or one entity, if not multiple. And the families are very aware of this, and they're very angry about this. They want to know about the building's owner. His name is Andrew Wold. We tried to reach out to him several times, the city identifying him today. He hasn't gotten back to us. The city was involved in inspections and improving inspections on this building for a while, even though there were concerns about its structure. So they say they're now doing kind of a retroactive investigation as to how it got to this point. But in the meantime, I do want to play a soundbite. Those two people that we've talked about that officials think are buried in the rubble, one of them, his name is Ryan Hitchcock. He's a computer technician. His mom told us earlier she's just utterly baffled by how this is kind of all sort of haphazardly, it seems, been coming together. Take a listen.
But I don't know who knows what, you know? And so I'm just hoping that he possibly still is alive. It's ridiculous, you know? I mean, these people, they could still be alive. You know, not just him, but other people.
And Hallie, just to kind of drive home the fear point, you played a soundbite from the sister of the other man earlier in this segment, the sister of Brandon Colvin. That's one of the other two who is missing, authorities believe, or the families believe, in this rubble. There's an apartment, I don't know if you can see it in our shot, at the very top in the center. There's a rack of clothes there. They pointed up and they said, that's his apartment, that's his closet, that's where we think he was when this collapsed. And they believe, again, he is trapped in this rubble, and they say they are just praying someone goes in. And if they don't, they say, let us go in. We'll do it ourselves.
Heartbreaking. Maggie, I want to ask before we go, when you asked that question, who failed here? What was the response? What did they say?
Roundabout response, essentially. They weren't able to say definitively who failed, because he said there's still a potential criminal investigation involved. So basically, they weren't able to nail it down, but the city's saying we're going to look into that was basically the answer.
Maggie Vespa, live for us in Davenport. Maggie, we're so glad you're there. Thank you for your reporting that you're doing. Really appreciate it. Let's take you down to Florida now, where tonight police are still on the hunt for other people connected to a shooting near a beach in Florida on Memorial Day. 9 people ended up hurt, including a kid, a baby. Police say as of this morning, they've arrested 2 people. They've recovered 5 guns from the suspects, 2 of which were stolen. They're identifying 2 men who they arrested right after this thing happened, with the city's mayor saying not too long ago he's confident they're going to find others still suspected in this thing. Listen.
When you do something like this in broad daylight with CCTV cameras up and down our Broadwalk, you will be identified and you will be caught and brought to justice.
It was supposed to be a relaxing day off, right? Memorial Day, but it turned violent, according to police, when 2 groups of people got into a fight. Take a look at this video. It appears to show the moments right after the shots were fired. Look at that. What would you do, right? You'd probably run. If you're at the beach and you heard that, that's what those people are doing. They're trying to get somewhere safe, get to safety. Guad Venegas is joining us now. So, Guad, talk us through where this stands now. What else we're finding out tonight?
Hallie, authorities have released 3 photos. These are images, screenshots essentially, from the surveillance videos of 3 individuals that they are still looking for. They are asking the public, any witnesses, anyone that was here, to give them any information, perhaps people that might have videos or photos of their cell phones. They are hoping that some of those witnesses might recognize them because of the outfits that they were wearing. We know that thousands of people were on the beach when this happened late Monday afternoon. Authorities say police was very quick to response and arrive after these gunshots erupted. And you mentioned, what do you do if you're there? You run. But unfortunately, some of the victims that were there were struck by gunfire. We know that 9 people were struck by gunfire after police arrived and attended to those victims. We also know that yesterday they did detain 1 person of interest. As of yesterday, Hallie, they had informed that they were looking for 1 suspect. Then today is when we were informed that they were looking for these 3 individuals as they shared those images. And then they also informed that they had detained the other 2 individuals on gun charges. They also told us they recovered 5 handguns, but 2 of those are the ones that are stolen, 1 in Texas and another one in Florida. So it's sort of lots of bits of information that we have been receiving since yesterday as they still ask for people for more details. And there were numerous witnesses, hundreds can be seen running away from the scene. We're going to hear from one of the witnesses that was there when this happened.
Really, the scariest part was really just seeing parents dragging their children almost like across the floor to get behind the small wall barrier that was literally the only protection that anyone had from just trying to stay clear of all the chaos that was going on.
And that witness mentioned the children. Most of the individuals I've spoken to about what happened yesterday mentioned the fact that there were a lot of children running away from the area where this happened. We also know that, of course, 4 of the 9 wounded are minors. The other 5 are adults.
Guad Venegas live for us there in Hollywood. Guad, thank you very much. Some of the biggest names in AI are out with a pretty serious warning tonight that the risks from the tech that they built are on par with maybe the next pandemic. Or even worse, it's a 22-word statement. It's short, from nearly 400 experts. I'm going to read it to you, arguing that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. Guys, nuclear war. That's what they're kind of comparing this to here. It's not anybody saying this stuff. It's the people behind some of these companies, in part, including OpenAI. That makes ChatGPT. I bet you've used ChatGPT lately. The letter is even getting signed by two of the people considered godfathers of AI who won this big annual computing prize for the work that they've done. I want to bring in CNBC tech correspondent Steve Kovac, who's covering this for us now. So, Steve, fine, I get it. That's a big siren. If you're going to compare something to like a pandemic or nuclear war, like you're going to get people's attention. But the people sounding this alarm are the people who built this tech in the first place. How does that make sense?
It's thick with irony, I guess, Hallie. And look, you're exactly right to point out that disconnect between what they're saying and what they're actually doing. But this is how Silicon Valley has operated for so long. Take a look at Uber, for example, Hallie. Uber would not exist today if it didn't skirt around local taxi cab laws, including here in New York City where I live, and become this behemoth that it is today. So there's almost like you get a badge of honor in Silicon Valley if you just kind of push forward and develop technology, ask questions later. The difference here, though, is these groups got together because, look, they need to show people that they're thinking about the dangers here. But look, they can't all agree on something. That's why you only get a 22-word statement. No one wants humanity to be extinct, so everyone can agree on that, and that's what we got.
Good Lord, is that really the bar? Like, let's continue
Exactly.
to keep humanity alive? Like, my God, I think we can all truly, like, agree on that, probably. I mean, you know, but, like, what's interesting here is, because I do understand, I don't want to, like, there is nuance here, right? Like, I get this computing technology, AI, was like, it's been years in the making, right? I mean, this is stuff people work on for a long time. Like, the tech was probably inevitable at some point anyway, so now you have these people coming together. It seems to me like they're basically saying, in some ways, please regulate us. Like, please help us put some guardrails in place, because it's almost like we don't trust each other and ourselves to do it for ourselves.
Yeah, they're not just, it's not as if they're saying it. They literally are saying it. Sam Altman, who you just mentioned, the OpenAI CEO, I was down there in Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago in your neighborhood when he was testifying in front of a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee saying, please, please, please regulate us. Now, here's the rub, though, Hallie. They only want to be regulated the way they want to be regulated. So what they're asking for is prescriptive regulation, saying things like AI can't be used for, well, murder, nuclear war, things in that statement right there. They're also saying, at least in the United States, they would like to see a licensing model. So, for example, if you want to create an advanced AI product, the government has to license you first to make sure you adhere to those standards. At the same time, though, last week, Sam Altman, he was in the EU, Hallie, and as soon as he got whiff of some of the regulation they're working on that he didn't like, he threatened to pull out. He since walked that back, but it said a lot by threatening to pull out as soon as he saw some regulation he didn't like.
Steve Kovac, CNBC, thank you very much for
Thanks,
that breakdown. Appreciate it. In the first day of trial for the man charged in that 2018 mass shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue, federal prosecutors say the shooter moved, and I'm quoting here, moved methodically to find the Jews he hated so much, they say. Shooting killed 11 people. These faces you see here in the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. The alleged shooter's attorney didn't deny that he actually carried this thing out, but instead focusing on why he did it, saying there's more to the story than just a hatred for Jewish people. He's now facing 63 charges, including 11 hate crimes related to the people who were killed. Federal prosecutors want the death penalty. He's pleaded not guilty. I want to bring in Kathy Park, who is live for us outside the courthouse in Pittsburgh. Talk us through this, Kathy.
Hallie, good evening to you. Yeah, as you mentioned, this is day one of what will likely be a very lengthy trial. We heard opening statements from the government as well as Robert Bauer's defense team. Prosecutors essentially laid out what happened that tragic day, October 2018, and they talked about those 11 worshipers who were gunned down. They were perhaps the most devout. There were also older members of the synagogue. The gunman entered the synagogue with an arsenal of weapons, including an AR-15, and left a trail of destruction. There were some victims' family members who were also in the courtroom today, and obviously when they heard these chilling details, they were visibly shaken. There were a lot of tears shed in the courtroom today. Meanwhile, the defense, the lead defense attorney is Judy Clark, representing Robert Bowers, and she said, look, there is no doubt that her client did this, and I think that took a lot of people by surprise. But the big question here, and I guess where gets a little fuzzy and where it gets a little gray is actually the motive. And she said it was actually motivated by hate or perhaps his irrational action. And she said ultimately you can't make sense of a senseless act. She also described her client as being socially awkward and quiet and to himself. But Hallie, perhaps the most emotional part of the day was when we heard the 911 dispatch tapes. We heard one of the victims pleading for help, asking for help, and ultimately a dispatch on the other end. She was saying, look, don't move. And then shortly after that, you heard screams, you heard gunfire, and we found out that she was among the victims, the 11 dead.
Kathy Park, an emotional day, obviously difficult day there in Pittsburgh. Appreciate your reporting. The White House, not too long ago, saying they're gathering information about who might have been behind that extraordinary drone strike that hit Moscow today. With the administration holding firm, it does not support attacks inside Russia. Listen.
We have been focused on providing Ukraine, as you've heard from the president, as you've heard from National Security Advisor and many colleagues from the NSC, my colleagues from the NSC, with the equipment and training they need to retake their own sovereign territory.
Look at some of the damage here, right? This is what happened. Buildings in Moscow attacked for the first time since this invasion of Ukraine began. And you're wondering, okay, well, wait a second. So who did it? Could it have been Ukraine? Obviously, they're at war with Russia. Ukraine says it has nothing directly to do with the attack, but that they were happy to see it. So still kind of a mystery as to who was actually behind it. Now, on the flip side, you've got a barrage in Ukraine's capital city of Kyiv. Missiles, more of them overnight, drones attacking. One person was killed. Hallie is joining us now. Big question, Hallie, right? If Ukraine says it wasn't them, who was it that did this drone attack on Moscow?
Well, I mean, that's the $64,000 question. But Ukraine traditionally have never taken any responsibility for attacks that have happened in Russia. They said they don't know who's behind it. It could be Russian separatists. I guess it's part of their policy not to, but they were certainly very happy about it, Hallie. President Zelensky's advisor said that, you know, we were watching with much happiness these drones hitting Moscow, and he anticipated that there was more to come. So who did it? We're not sure, but the Ukrainians are certainly very happy about it. And it certainly rattled Muscovites. And don't forget, since the beginning of this war, Vladimir Putin has been telling Russians that you're safe from any Ukrainian attacks. They can't strike this deep into Russia. You have nothing to worry about. And there you are this morning at the crack of dawn being attacked by drones. Now, the damage wasn't very significant, as you pointed out, some broken windows and blackened facades. But psychologically, the damage is quite serious. It's basically telling the Russians that the Ukrainians can penetrate their defenses, can hit the capital, which is so well guarded. And this is all coming before this very much anticipated offensive by the Ukrainians. So not a good day for the Kremlin.
In Ukraine, right, we talked about that barrage in Kyiv. That's like the second time in 24 hours we've talked about a major barrage in Ukraine. It is actually the 17th round of airstrikes in that city this month alone. It is a renewed stress, it seems, on people there a year plus into this war.
Definitely, Hallie. I mean, look, it happens so often there. There have been 17 attacks in Kyiv in the month of May alone. And, you know, although it happens to the Ukrainians almost on a daily basis, you can't really say they get used to it because it is an extremely stressful event. As soon as those bombs or drones come towards Kyiv or any other city in Ukraine, the air raid sirens go. People have to scramble to get to a basement somewhere. They have to, you know, tuck their kids underneath their arms and run for cover somewhere, and it's extraordinarily stressful. And this month in particular, it's been happening almost every day. So even though it happens so often, people don't get used to it. And I think people in Moscow got a taste of what people in Kyiv have been experiencing.
Hallie, thank you so much. I appreciate your reporting there for us. We've got more breaking news from overseas tonight, and it is dramatic, right? Some major confusion over what North Korea may or may not have just done and how South Korea is responding tonight. We're going to bring that to you right after the break. Plus, more trouble for Carnival Cruises. What we're just finding out about the search for a man who Coast Guard officials say fell overboard near Florida. Plus, your luggage may not be the only thing getting weighed next time you fly. Why one airline says it'll start asking people to step on a scale. Right now, tonight, we're just learning a 33-year-old woman who's been missing for weeks has apparently been spotted in Northern California. Look at this photo. Police say Nikki Michelle Alcaraz was last seen here using that Walmart ATM kiosk in Northern California Saturday. We're also just now seeing a police report of an alleged altercation between Alcaraz and her boyfriend, Steven Tyler Stratton, from May 4th, just days before she apparently disappeared. Police are now posting missing persons posters for Alcaraz, like the ones that you see, with her brother telling our team a truck driver saw Stratton beating Alcaraz in New Mexico and called police just days before she disappeared.
He gets aggressive. I didn't know the extent of it until recently, but, you know, I know that none of us really liked him to begin with, but you can't tell Nikki anything.
It is a case that has some drawing some comparisons, some eerie similarities with that of Gabby Petito, the 22-year-old woman who was killed by her fiancé when they went on a cross-country road trip. Stephen Romo is following all of this for us and joins us now. So again, it's the cross-country road trip. It's that she went missing. It's that there was this altercation here. But now this new and important detail that she apparently was in Northern California just on Saturday, right? So talk us through this.
Yeah, Hallie, a bit of a mixed bag for that family who just desperately wants to find Nikki right now. They do know that she was spotted on Saturday, but they're unable to get a hold of her. They say that she possibly sold her phone. That's what she's doing at that kiosk right there, according to Redding police. And to be clear, we want to point out that her boyfriend, Steven Tyler Stratton, authorities say he is not a suspect or person of interest in this case. Of course, that domestic violence incident we've been talking about that happened on May 4th, raising a lot of questions, raising a lot of nervousness from her family on this situation. We also know the Cheatham County District Attorney in Tennessee, where they started their trip, is saying that because of that domestic violence incident, he does consider Alcaraz here to be at risk and desperately wants to find her. Here's more of what her family has to say.
She's very consistent on contacting family and friends, you know, no more than a day or two. She don't want to go without some kind of contact, and they haven't heard from her for now going on almost 3 weeks. Yeah, we're just very concerned as to what's going on and where she is.
Now, the Cheatham County Sheriff's Office is saying, quote, due to the history of domestic violence, we do believe she is in danger. We also talked to Stratton's family, and they declined to have any comments about any domestic allegations, but they too say they just want their family member to be found. And you mentioned the Gabby Petito case, Hallie. We've actually learned from the family that Gabby Petito's mother has been in contact with the Alcaraz family, offering support, offering to try to help organize some search parties to give them assistance, due to large part to the similarities in these cases.
Stephen Romo, thank you very much with those developments for us tonight. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, former First Lady Rosalynn Carter has been diagnosed with dementia, according to the Carter Center. She's 95 years old. She's at home with her husband now, former President Jimmy Carter. He's been getting hospice care the last few months. The Carter family writing that Rosalynn spent much of her life as one of the country's leading mental health advocates, and that they wanted to make this announcement publicly about her dementia to try to reduce some of the stigma around it. Number 2, the Coast Guard is looking for somebody who went overboard on a cruise ship in the last 24 hours. The Carnival Magic was about 180 miles off the coast of Jacksonville when this passenger apparently went overboard. The cruise corporation says security footage showed him leaning over the railing of his room's balcony around 4 in the morning before falling into the water. Number 3, an attorney representing the man accused of stabbing tech exec Bob Lee to death last month is withdrawing from the case, telling the court she had some kind of conflict of interest, although no elaboration on that. Her former client, Nima Momeni, has replaced her with a Miami-based defense attorney. He's pleaded not guilty. Number 4, a new report from the CDC says 40% of the illnesses of you getting sick at a restaurant, 40% of those times are probably able to be traced directly back to an employee who was sick. The study points out that a lot of restaurants don't have very good sick leave policies, meaning that workers are more likely to show up and maybe to handle food even if they're symptomatic. So any minute now, we will see Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis hold his first official campaign rally of the 2024 presidential campaign cycle. It is a moment for him, right? After last week's moment for him when he rolled out his budding presidential campaign in a Twitter Spaces. DeSantis is going to spend the next 4 days in the key early states of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. He's launching what's expected to be a multi-million-dollar so-called ground game. That's just what like Politico people talk about for like people knocking on doors, getting the mailers out, making sure people actually show up to vote for you. It's a ramping up for DeSantis, even as his numbers have been falling down against the guy who currently has a grip on the Republican Party, and that is, of course, former President Donald Trump. You can see the numbers here, where DeSantis was back in February 2023 in a head-to-head, up about 3%. Now down something like 20 in a new poll out today. I want to bring in Gabe Gutierrez, who is in Des Moines with the DeSantis campaign. It is a buzz with people behind you. How much does the DeSantis camp care about some of these poll numbers? How much are they saying they care? How much do they actually care, right?
Hey there, Hallie. Well, the DeSantis campaign publicly are blowing those off. And,
sure.
You know, they basically said, you know, 2 donors and fundraisers last week, they came ready with these talking points, right? According to their internal polling, they say they are about to meet their moment. They say that because he wasn't formally a candidate yet, he hasn't been able to establish that contrast between himself and former President Trump. They think that Trump has about 35% of the GOP electorate, that 20% or so are ready to go for other candidates potentially, but about 45% are just right for Governor DeSantis and for the message that he is selling. And he is hoping that that message hits especially well here in Iowa among evangelical voters, and expect that message from him in just a few minutes as he takes the stage here at this suburban Des Moines church. We spoke with a pastor earlier today, and I asked him about whether he supported this ongoing feud between Governor DeSantis and Disney, something that has worried some Republicans across the country, saying that it's not really a good general election message, but the DeSantis team says it is very good politics in a primary or a caucus, of course, as it is here in Iowa. Take a listen to what that pastor told me just a short time ago.
DeSantis is framing the issue for evangelicals the right way. We don't see this as, you know, a battle between DeSantis and Disney. It's a battle for children. It's a battle for protecting children from an ideology that the majority of parents in the United States do not want to be thrust upon their children.
And Hallie, just, you know, before this event started, I did speak with a potential DeSantis supporter, and that message resonated with this man. You know, he said, he's told me something very interesting. He said that Governor DeSantis is well-spoken, while former President Trump is outspoken. And in his view, what he wants to see is he wants somebody who is well-spoken. He doesn't want the unpredictability that comes with former President Trump. At least that's the way he sees it. He's visiting, or he's coming here to see Governor DeSantis speak. And again, his team now making that pitch for those evangelical voters so critical in this caucus state. Hallie?
That's right. And there's a lot of ways this could go over the next, 8 months or so before voters actually start voting here. Gabe Gutierrez live for us there in Iowa, a place you will be spending a lot of time. Gabe, thank you so much. Coming up here on the show, that breaking news, that wartime alert walked back. We'll tell you what's happening in South Korea tonight after a break. Plus, why a top American tennis player says racism against athletes has only gotten worse. And officials in Venice now say they know why the water in the famous Grand Canal turned green. We'll tell you coming up. Some breaking news from our team on the ground in South Korea. Some confusion tonight after apparently with officials in Seoul walking back what was a citywide, quote, wartime alert. Our producer there says she got a text from the Ministry of Interior and Safety saying that alert was an error message, in fact, 9 minutes after a citywide message that said people needed to evacuate ASAP, get the kids, get the senior citizens out first. That's after North Korea launched apparently what they call a space launch vehicle. That is a launch that was not totally unexpected. There was some thinking that perhaps North Korea would try to do this. Josh Letterman is following the story from London. Let me just lay this out, Josh, because this sort of just has blown up in the last 30 minutes or so. Important context here. People in South Korea and nearby Japan, which also apparently canceled an evacuation alert, have been pretty on edge that North Korea would actually launch something. Tell us what we know happened and then what had to be walked back.
So this all started about 6:30 in the morning this morning, Seoul time, Hallie, when that alert went out, not only by text message, but also apparently on loudspeakers in South Korea, urging the beginning of this evacuation, warning that North Korea had launched this space launch vehicle southward, meaning from North Korea toward South Korea. The Japanese also had that brief alert about an evacuation, but only about 10 minutes after the South Koreans put out that notice did they walk it back, saying that there had been an error. And in fact, in the last few minutes or so, we've learned from Japan's military that they believe that what was launched has now potentially crashed or fallen to the ground. They don't believe that there is currently a threat to their territory or to South Korea itself. There appears to be some debris or possibly the rocket itself that would have landed in the Yellow Sea. But as you point out, this is a time when there was already very high alert because North Korea in the last few days has been announcing their plans to launch their very first military reconnaissance satellite, essentially a spy satellite that would violate UN conventions because it could be used as a cover for ballistic missile tests, and has also raised all kinds of fears about North Korea's ability to spy on South Korea, on Japan, on other countries in the region, including U.S. military assets that are in Guam, that are in other parts of Asia. And so the whole region has been concerned about those spy capabilities, but also about what this launch could potentially mean, because every time North Korea sends anything up in the air that's potentially going southward, that could potentially threaten its neighbor South Korea, there is intense concerns about whether something could fall, could potentially injure those people who are in South Korea. Just about 40 miles south of the DMZ is where millions and millions of people live in Seoul, the largest city in South Korea. And so as we speak, Hallie, officials both in South Korea and Japan are working to identify what exactly it was that North Korea launched. Was it that military spy satellite they've been talking about for days? Because the North had said they planned to launch that spy satellite sometime between tomorrow and June 11th. So it appears they may have gone early. Officials now trying to figure out exactly what happened this morning. Hallie?
Josh Letterman, thank you very much for helping us understand some of that. More to come for sure on that story. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of other international stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our foreign desk has done it for you. Here is some of what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. Out of New Zealand, an airline is starting to weigh passengers before they get on international flights. It's happening in Auckland. Air New Zealand says it wants to measure the average weight of everything on board. It said participation is voluntary. It'll happen at the gate before boarding. It's not going to, display it on a big number for everybody to see, and then it's not going to delay flights. Okay. Out of the UK, my personal favorite sporting event of the year, a cheese race. Dozens of people chasing a 7-pound wheel of cheese down a hill in England. Yes, please. Send me there next year. It's this annual thing. Winners get to keep that block of cheese. Look, there she is. She's 19. She did it. She got the cheese, man. She actually got knocked out by it. Literally, she got knocked unconscious. She says, I just remember hitting my head, and now I have the cheese. Sounds like a Friday night at my house. Out of Italy, some answers in a story we told you about last night. Local officials say the water in the Grand Canal turned bright green because of this chemical that's apparently harmless called fluorescein. The green is gone now. They still are trying to figure out where this chemical came from. TBD on that. Back here at home in the U.S., a tennis star in America is opening up, sharing more about how racist abuse online is getting worse as she advances to the next round in the French Open. And now the French Open is actually doing something that no major tournament has ever done to try to get a handle on some of this stuff, a first-of-its-kind move. Here's the deal. Sloane Stephens is telling reporters during this news conference in Paris that she has constantly found herself a target of racist attacks on the internet.
It's obviously been a problem my entire career. It has never stopped. People online have the free reign to say and do whatever they want behind fake pages, which is obviously very troublesome.
She's not the only one. We know big tennis stars like Serena and Venus Williams and Naomi Osaka have all talked about their own struggles dealing with online hate. It has gotten to a point now where the French Open is trying something new, trying something different. They are bringing in new tech to try to help, with the French Tennis Federation giving all players a software. It's called Bodyguard AI. It's meant to filter out some of the harassment and hate speech that pops up online during this tournament. Ron Allen joins us now to talk about this. And Ron, this is a new move by officials to try to do something. If they can't address, obviously, the underlying issue, this horrific racism and abuse, they at least want to try to keep all of it from filtering up to these athletes.
Yes, the athletes can download the software Bodyguard AI, and it blocks hate speech on their social media accounts. Also, the account of the Tennis Federation, public accounts and not private messaging. But it's a very interesting step that's being taken for the first time at Roland Garros, the French Open, to try and protect the athletes, to try and create a safe space. It's being described as an anti-hate online tool that the athletes can use. Unclear just how effective it's been. Sloane Stephens said in that press conference that she's aware of it. She hasn't tried it yet, but she was a little skeptical because, again, there are so many ways to evade detection online that she was a little doubtful. But they're trying it. It's the first time it's been tried at a Grand Slam or any other major sporting event that I know of. Hallie?
Talk about the way that this affects some of these athletes' performances.
Well, it's a barrage of online hate, online negativity that many athletes have said has just sapped their energy, sapped their strength, and it's hurt their performances in many ways. Naomi Osaka was very outspoken about this a couple of years ago. Serena, others have all said it's not just racism, it's cyberbullying, it's all kinds of things, and it's a big concern. Here's Andrew Krasny of the Tennis Channel talking about his concerns about all the cyberbullying, and what he hopes happens. Take a listen.
I'm praying and hoping that with modern technology and with what we're seeing with artificial intelligence, that we're going to start creating more barriers and more walls and firewalls that we can start protecting not only Sloane Stephens and other tennis players, but we can start protecting young girls and teenagers and society at large by online bullies.
It's interesting. They're talking about creating a safe space, again, in the tennis world by players using this software on their accounts, the Tennis Federation, tournament organizers as well. You could see how this could be extrapolated to other areas of society, other sporting leagues, to businesses, to other community groups, things of that nature. It seems to be another step on the road towards trying to use technology to make the world a safer place in this cyber environment. Hallie?
Ron Allen, thank you very much for that. Still to come, the LA Dodgers Pride Night is making headlines again, this time because of the team's star pitcher, Clayton Kershaw. Why he says he disagrees with one group's invite. The superstar pitcher for the LA Dodgers, Clayton Kershaw, is sharing in a new interview that the team is bringing back Faith Night, apparently, after he says he was not comfortable with the team's decision to re-invite a provocative LGBTQ+ group to the Pride Night event next month. Kershaw's telling the LA Times he disagrees with the decision to welcome the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, saying he doesn't agree with making fun of other people's religions. We've talked about this whole thing on the show before. The group satirizes Catholic imagery, some dressing up as nuns. They're trying to raise money and awareness for LGBTQ+ related issues. You see the timeline here, right? The Dodgers announced that the group would get an award. Then they uninvited the group because of backlash from conservatives, including Senator Marco Rubio, for example. Then the Dodgers re-invited the group after backlash from the gay community in Los Angeles. And apparently, at Kershaw's insistence, the team then sped up announcing a relaunch of that Christian Faith Night that had been put on pause because of COVID. That's going to be in July. Dana Griffin is joining us now from L.A. Kershaw has always been, he is somebody who is outspoken about his faith. And to be clear in this interview, and we showed that little graphic on screen, he's like, hey, this is not about the LGBTQ+ community. It's this specific group because he says other people shouldn't make fun of other people's religions.
Exactly, and that's the reason why he wanted to expedite his announcement for the Christian and Family Fun Day that's also going to be held at Dodger Stadium. You know, he says, like you mentioned, this has nothing to do with the LGBTQ+ community, but he feels that this particular group, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which, as you mentioned, is a satirical group that uses the costume, drag, and religious imagery to highlight other social issues that plague, their community. And so he looks at it as, they're making fun of my religion or someone else's religion, and I don't think that that's right. But he did say that he didn't want to make a bold statement disavowing the group or, condemning the group, but instead he wanted to highlight what he believes in as a Christian. So that's why he put the statement out in that interview with the LA Times. He says, as a follower of Christ, we're supposed to love everybody well. And I think that means being able to be at a lot of different places and be able to be part of a lot of different things. And that's why he is not boycotting that event, which is happening on June 16th. Hallie?
It's not just the Dodgers dealing with some of these being put in the spotlight over the way that they're navigating Pride Night and Pride Month, which starts soon, right?
You're right. You know, there are some teams that also have pride-themed events, like the NHL. Two teams in particular. You've got the Florida Panthers. Their players, two brothers, Eric and Mark Stahl, did not participate because it says it goes against their religious beliefs. But then on the other side, you've got the Chicago Blackhawks that were planning to do a pride-themed jersey, but decided not to because of a Russian player that they have on their team. And because of the anti-gay laws in Russia, they didn't want this particular player and others associated with the organization to face some sort of backlash or punishment, strict punishment when they return home to Russia. So you've got the teams that are trying to be inclusive to these organizations, but at the same time, you've got players that are saying, hey, this goes against my religious beliefs. Hallie?
Dana Griffin live for us there in Los Angeles. Dana, thank you very much. That's a wrap for this hour and for the one before it. And if you missed any of it, catch up on the latest reporting and the newest interviews from our team and all the breaking news. You can find us anytime in so many places, including Peacock, Hulu, YouTube, and more. Just search Hallie Jackson now. We've got more coverage here on NBC News Now. Top Story picks it up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.